Hi, this is Lauren Vaknine, and you're listening to the Reconditioned podcast. I'm taking a little summer hiatus from recording, so in the meantime, I've dug out some of our most loved episodes from the archives to entertain and educate you over the summer. Over the next few weeks, you'll hear from guests such as Bruce Lipton, Jay Shetty, Emily Fletcher, and others, as well as some of the most downloaded Rise episodes. Wishing you a fabulous summer, and I will be back with a very expansive season 11 in the autumn. If you've been here a while, you'll know that I believe that we should get whatever we can in the way of nutrition through food. And where we can't get it through food, that's where we supplement. Now, in order to get myself from disabled to completely able-bodied, I had to be really specific and well-researched when it came to supplements, which is why I've been using AMRITA Nutrition for the past decade, more than decade actually, to buy pretty much 95% of the supplements I take and recommend. Now, AMRITA stock the highest quality brands using the highest quality non-synthetic ingredients. Most of these brands couldn't even be bought in the UK when I started taking them years ago, so AMRITA have made it super easy and accessible. And the other great thing about AMRITA is they offer personal support. So if you're not sure of which supplement to order, you can call them and they'll advise you. Now, they're usually a practitioner-only stockist, but you can buy supplements from AMRITA now using practitioner invite code Lauren, which will get you 10% off all supplements. And once you set up an account, that 10% will be applied to every order. I've gone ahead and created a collection of all my favorite supplements with AMRITA to help you out with it, which you can find in the show notes or on my website by typing in AMRITA. Otherwise, just visit amritanutrition.co.uk and use code Lauren for 10% off. Thank you so much to AMRITA for continuing to support our mission here at Reconditioned. Hello everyone, thank you for joining once again. I have been so excited to record this episode with Dr. Christiane Northrup. She's just sensational, a visionary pioneer, or as Tommy John calls her, spiritual ninja, which I think is a great term. She's just awesome. She's just fearless, fierce, absolute goddess. And she has so much to teach women. She has so much to teach everyone, but specifically women. And what's important is that men can benefit so much from listening to and reading about her work about women and women's bodies. And my husband is actually reading one of her books at the moment, Goddesses Never Age. And I think all men should be reading books like that to have a deeper understanding on how women's bodies work and why, and how to support that. Her books are incredible. And if you are a woman anywhere near, I mean, I am not yet approaching menopause or perimenopause, but I have read her book, The Wisdom of Menopause, because it's essential reading, because the entire purpose of her work is to prepare our bodies so that we don't get to menopause and then just look at it and go, oh, I'm going through menopause, I'm having hot sweats, I'm having hot flashes, I'm going through this, I can't remember anything, I've got extreme brain fog, I'm in pain, Why do we expect that we can treat our bodies in any way we want and not really look after them and help them thrive in the way that nature intended? And then when something goes wrong, we moan about it and expect that there's going to be a quick fix. The entire point of living in this holistic way is to give your body what it needs constantly. So when you get to that point, you're not facing those difficulties. And I heard about this series, supposedly, that Davina McCall is doing on menopause. And it kind of got me a bit upset because it's just one side of the story. It's her experience of menopause based on perhaps her not taking these precautionary preventative measures. I don't know, maybe she did. That's me being presumptuous and that I don't ever want to do that. But the purpose of Dr. Northrup's work is to teach women how to have respect and reverence for their bodies and how to help our bodies thrive and approach any transitionary period with all the information we need to ensure that we give our bodies the very best chance of health, of getting through menopause and allowing it to be something that actually we don't have to get through. It's another phase of womanhood. And it can be a magical time. Anyway, we do not spend the whole time talking about menopause. In fact, we barely talk about menopause. We do touch on it. because we spoke about lots of other things, like everything that's going on in the world right now and how we manage that and how we keep ourselves kind of sane during these times. And we did speak about women's bodies and how to be a sovereign woman and take back your goddamn power, as the title would tell you. Anyway, she is truly a wonder, and I was so honored to be able to have her on the podcast. You'll love this episode. She's got so many nuggets of wisdom, and I just hope you all enjoy it. And if you do enjoy it, or you enjoy any of the episodes, please remember to leave a review on iTunes. It really helps me. It helps the podcast to get out to more people. It helps more people hear about the podcast. So please do that, and check out the show notes for more information. So here she is. It's Dr. Christiane Northrup. Christiane Northrup, MD, visionary pioneer in women's health, is a board-certified OBGYN with more than 30 years of clinical experience. Former assistant clinical professor of OBGYN at the University of Vermont College of Medicine and three-time New York Times bestselling author of Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom, The Wisdom of Menopause, and Goddesses Never Age. In 2013, Reader's Digest named Dr. Northrup one of the 100 most trusted people in America. In 2016, she was named one of Oprah Winfrey's Super Soul 100, a group of leaders who are using their voices and talent to awaken humanity. And in 2020 and 2021, she was included in the Watkins Spiritual 100, a list of living people that make a unique and spiritual contribution on a global scale. Internationally known for her empowering approach, Dr. Northrup embraces medicine, acknowledges the unity of mind, body, emotions, and spirit, and teaches women to create health by tuning into their inner wisdom. After decades spent transforming women's understanding of their sacred bodies and processes, Dr. Northrup now teaches women to thrive at every stage of life. So welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Oh, it's such a pleasure and an honor to have you. I've been following your work for such a long time. And as you know, I had your daughter Kate on the show as well.
Yes,
and
yes.
I'm just, so it's funny because with all my guests, I usually have an intention for each episode. With you, there's just so much to cover and so many places to go with it that I honestly don't know where to start. But before we begin properly, I do like to start the episode by asking my guests, what have you done so far today to support your wellness?
I took a shower outside in the sunshine. I held my couple cats. And as always, I began the morning checking in with my colleagues all around the world for support and solidarity as we create the new earth together.
So let's start there then, because you've taken us into that quite nicely. And there are so, like I said, there's so many places we can go with this. And I do want to touch on all of them. I want to touch on women's health. I want to speak about aging and how you approach that. But we can't kind of move forward without acknowledging your place in kind of this new movement at the moment. And right. Also, yeah, and kind of your part in that. You've had a huge part in awakening the collective, I guess, and your IG lives during the lockdowns were honestly, one of the things that were keeping me going. So I'd love to just get your perspective on actually, because my community always, we're always talking about what is the deeper meaning here? Why is this happening and why is it pushing us so far out of our comfort zones?
Well, that's what it takes to birth something. Anyone who's had a baby knows that you get to, 8, 9 centimeters, and you get fully dilated at 10 centimeters. And that last little bit is excruciating for most, not all. And this is when women say, I'm done. I'm leaving. I can't take it another moment. But I've had that same experience on hiking trips early on in my life with my family, because I had a mother whose idea of a great time was a heavy backpack and climbing up mountains in the rain. And that prepared me beautifully for the career ahead, because we have more in us than we know. We have more in us than we know. However, we're also hardwired to seek the easiest path. I mean, we really are. I have a personal trainer, and we started with squats. And he'd say, get down further. And it was excruciating. I hadn't done that in forever. I'd done Pilates, but nothing like this and nothing like these heavy weights. And so everyone needs to know what the edge is, like how far they can push it. There's two groups of people. There are the ultra athletes, the marathon runners. They don't know when to stop. That group doesn't know when to stop. And many of them die prematurely because they've wrecked their immune system from overexercise. That is not the vast majority. The vast majority have never known what that edge looks like. They've never known how much they can take. The entire human race is now in a grand rebirth into our magnificence. But what will not work and is not working is to escape into drugs, alcohol, sex, food, depression, sleeping, denial. That won't work. Or pretending, as some of my colleagues have tried to do, oh, we're just going to be neutral.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not going to say anything. We prefer to be Switzerland, by the way, you all know Switzerland is anything but neutral, but still we understand the concept. And so at this point, it also takes so much courage. I was reading an article about Dave Chappelle and his latest comedy special, where all good comedy is based on the truth. It's the truth that we can all laugh at. And apparently in this comedy special, which I haven't seen, he has a trans woman on, and he's making fun of the biologic gender and transgender. As an OBGYN, when I go near that, the criticism, the hate, but it's orchestrated hate. What I want people to know is this is not hate from your fellow human beings who have half a clue. This is pre-programmed hate that people have learned now in schools and over generations. So when I was doing those IG lives last year, I've lost 2 IG accounts now, of course. So I'm on Telegram. And when I was starting in, all I had done, and let's be very clear with your audience, all I had done was testify against vaccine mandates for children in schools, nursery schools, colleges, because our state was proposing 72 shots by the age of 18 for all children in any nursery school, daycare, any of that. And using peer-reviewed medical literature, what we used to call science, I gave a very solid argument for why this wasn't necessary, given that our state has a 95% voluntary inoculation rate. And after I testified, I was then on the cover of Maine Women's Magazine, a fluffy article about wanting to get married and dancing tango. And the next thing you know, I'm the absolute target of Facebook. The hate was astounding. I mean, I've had a long and successful career. I mean, I've been on Oprah 10 times, and not that that matters now at all. That's like all done. That's gone. And then we had a local business called Coffee by Design that just began. The hate in their Facebook for me was puzzling, but I've spent so long in my career pushing the envelope with what should just be common sense, like delayed cord clamping, like putting the baby on the mother's abdomen, like putting the baby on the breast immediately. This stuff, I want everyone to know, was highly controversial. When I started my residency, we were still using twilight sleep, meaning giving the woman Seconal and scopolamine, strapping her down to the bed. She turned into a wild animal, would not really wake up for 3 days. And then the obstetrician would present the baby as though it was his gift to her. Then she'd fall in love with the obstetrician. So that's how I entered, and that was in Boston. At Dartmouth, where I trained as a med student, the women would go through labor naturally, but the baby would be whisked away from the mother. We'd drape her as though this was a surgical procedure. She'd have the baby, cut the cord, whisk it to the nursery as though this were some kind of medical emergency. And I'd watch these women, because every bone in her body, every cell of any mother is to reach down and bring the baby in. This is the being who's been part of her body and has developed to the beat of her heart. But now something so dire has happened. She gave birth. So we got to rush it off to the nursery to, here we go, clean it up and warm it up. When what it needs is to be, it needs to be colonized with the mother's bacteria and the mother's ecosystem. So I knew that was wrong. And so within the system, I pushed the envelope as much as I could, but in a loving, compassionate way. My colleagues were not monsters. They were just doing what they thought was right. And then I learned how to do circumcisions, and I did hundreds. We'd strap little boys down to a circumstraint. And I hope anyone, you're in the UK, thank God. In the United States, they still do this barbaric procedure in about 60% of little boys. It removes 40,000 nerve endings. It removes one of the most sensitive parts of the body. It changes a man's sexual experience for the rest of his life. So I learned to do that procedure. And I did it until I couldn't talk anyone out of it. I tried. I said, there's no reason for it. It took longer. It takes longer for the collective to come around. I can see it. And I've seen all this stuff years before. I thought vitamin D was a really good idea and began to talk about it in the early 1990s. That was 30 years ago. Only now are we talking about that? And quite frankly, at the beginning of last year, had we just gotten vitamin D into the care homes, we would have saved so many lives. Vitamin C, I remember listening to Dr. Andrew Saul speak about high dose vitamin C and how essential it is and how they used to cure polio with it. And one of his interviewers, because I'm listening, and he had sent tons of it to China to help those people. And someone said, well, if it's this effective, which it is, why isn't it used? He looked right in the camera and he said, Satan. And I remember being like shocked by that last year when I heard him. But I remembered all of my training about high dose vitamin C, and vitamin C itself at high dose kept me from going blind in my left eye while I was writing Mother-Daughter Wisdom. So, and God has a sense of humor. So vitamin C, SEE. So I was very used to being on the front lines, but doing it with enough social comportment so that I wasn't outwardly and viciously attacked. There was something about this particular time that I knew something was off. I knew something was wrong. And so I was compelled to talk about it every night on Facebook and Instagram, because I knew that if I were being called a racist, a white supremacist, a QAnon conspirator, I don't know what else. Oh, anti-vaxxer, of course. And by the way, that term, both anti-vaxxer and quack, quack was invented by the Rockefeller Foundation. Anti-vaxxer was a name from Big Pharma. So what I want to tell people, I want to get this in for your audience. I don't ever want to hear someone say, okay, because we've got all these people who've been injured by this current inoculation, really injured. And they begin their conversation to tell you about their injury. And they start with, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. What? So I get it. You're trying to keep your social bona fides. You're trying to keep your social, well, I'm not anti-science. I'm not. I did a lot of media training. And one of the things I learned is you don't start something with what you're not, because all the people will remember is what you are.
Mm.
Well, Richard Nixon, I am not a crook. What you remember is he's a crook. So what I would say to people is, as my friend Rashid Buttar, Dr. Rashid Buttar says, I'm not anti-vax, I'm anti-stupid.
Yeah.
And my feeling is that we all have to get away from our labels, because those labels have divided humanity. And I was noticing the reason that our group, sort of worldwide, someone came up with the term, we are the warriors of the radical light, not right, because people were getting trampled for their political views. This has never made any sense to me, but I see now that the narrative, the agenda has always been to divide people, because then we're weaker. And I didn't realize when I wrote Dodging Energy Vampires in 2018 that it was predictive programming for what was happening now, because I was writing the book so that people could see the average narcissist in their family, but also knowing that there were 1 in 100 people as a psychopath, no conscience whatsoever. And I wrote it to help people understand. So basically, so that the basic empathic, wonderful woman who reads my stuff would not stay with a frickin' narcissist for 30 years of marriage. Well, suddenly we're all being played by a few psychopaths at the top of this pyramid. And most people can't see it because of Stockholm syndrome. So they begin to argue for those who are abusing them, just like a battered woman. It's just part of the entire Biderman's steps of coercion and torture. I mean, and they began to tell people to isolate. We had people last year who came to my home who hadn't seen anyone or hugged anyone in 6 months, 7 months. That alone is torture for a human being. So I was just compelled from my entire career to go on IG and just start talking about my own experience, but also give hope, because I could see that this has also been called the Great Awakening. And the Great Awakening, for me, was an astrologic term having to do with the Pluto return. And it was never associated with any of the other things. And, then I learned, what's the difference between a conspiracy and the truth? And the answer is 6 months. People were saying last year where this is going to lead. This is going to lead to massive inoculation. No.
Oh, no, we said it at the beginning. We all, there was a meme today, actually, 3 weeks to, because this was our Prime Minister had said, 3 weeks to flatten the curve, stay at home for 3 weeks. So 3 weeks to flatten the curve has led to 3 jabs or don't feed your family.
That's it. That's right. Now, the thing to remember, I listened to Ben Tapper, Dr. Ben Tapper in Kansas City on Saturday. We were both there speaking, and Ben, like me, is one of the disinformation dozen. Yeah. And I think he quoted Thomas Jefferson, that one man with courage and the truth, something like this, is a majority. So we need to remember, we don't need to wake up the masses, although it's happening. It's happening, just like a woman in labor. Just before it's time to push, she's going to leave, and then boom, she's pushing. And then the baby comes and she forgets all about it. So there's no question that the system of tyranny and slavery, debt slavery, from the financial system that we have all lived under. Now, remember, gynecology is the study of money, sex, and power in the second chakra, in the pelvis. All of our problems with the pelvis, all the gynecologic problems, are related to our relationship with money, sex, and power. And the deep state, dark cult, whatever you want to call them, has manipulated humanity through the second chakra, money, sex, and power. The psychopaths running this agenda do not have access to delight, to spirituality, to ecstasy, to creativity. They don't have that access. What they're really good at is control and technology, artificial intelligence. If you look at, who was it that Unilever sponsored the Olympics, and they had their Unilever symbol around the Olympics. And if you went on the website, you would see that they're advertising the next great advance in human life, which is the combining of AI intelligence, a robot, and human intelligence. So they literally had a visual of a robotic hand and a human hand going like this, a recreation of Adam and God in the Sistine Chapel, where Adam reaches up and God comes down. Only for them, there is no God. So their God is control and artificial intelligence. So it's a robot finger and a human finger. And that's what this whole thing has been about, control. And it's been happening really for hundreds of years. I listened to Robert Michael talk about the legal system that we have. And there's very, very good proof that all of us on the planet have been controlled by the Vatican, the City of London, and Washington, D.C. Those are the three entities that have enslaved humanity through debt slavery. Because you remember in the 50s, people raised in the 50s and then early 60s, so post-World War II, one parent could stay at home and the other could work, and you could live quite a lovely life. And then in the 60s and the Vietnam War, and it all started again, because you've got to have a war to keep making the deep state money. And in fact, we now know that World War I and World War II were financed by the exact same people. So these are the truths of the Great Awakening, where people are realizing what I thought was the truth is not the truth. And if you can indoctrinate the human race into believing that their bodies need constant surveillance, constant disease screening, mammograms and ultrasounds and colonoscopies and all the rest of it, you can convince people that they need that, or they need a statin drug for their cholesterol, when all of that could be taken care of with lifestyle and diet. You convince people that they can't be well without an annual physical exam and annual blood tests and all of that. So the programming is, your birth is a disaster waiting to happen. Your life is a disaster waiting to happen. But we have the pill. We have the cure. So think about the mastermind behind all of this. And we go back, by the way, to smallpox and polio. And Suzanne Humphreys, Dissolving Illusions, has done a masterful job of pointing out that the vaccine agenda is not what you think. And everyone who died in the 1918 Great Flu Epidemic had an inoculation. So this PSYOP has been going on for a long time, and people really believe, and you know, because they're your friends and neighbors and maybe family members, that you need to get all these inoculations. That's what's keeping you healthy. You can't be healthy. Now we're inoculating pregnant women in the second trimester of pregnancy with DPT and flu shots. And here's what I want to know. What happened to, and by the way, these are the same women who eat natural food, do yoga, do grounding, believe in their power to be well. But when it comes to this shot, this particular one, you and I and our colleagues have just folded. Most of the past presidents of the American Holistic Medical Association have just folded. These are people who talked about vitamin D, vitamin C, delayed cord clamping, our ability to be healthy. You can see the medical literature. This thing that we're so afraid of has a 99.9% survival rate. And we've had wonderful treatments from the very beginning. And then every time you mention a treatment, which I did for a year and a half till I lost all those channels, then the fact checkers would say false information. Yeah. They would even say false information when you got the information from their own websites. And so it is, you can see how it would have taken, 2-3 generations for people to buy it, because they've been taught, get your annual physical. Then I think Nixon in the United States said, we're mounting a war on cancer. How well is that done? Yeah. Actually, a war on anything is not a good idea. What's a good idea is getting your vibration, your frequency as high as you possibly can. And here's where people fall off the truck. High frequency is also associated with the truth. Looking straight at these psychopaths and telling the truth and looking at the truth of it. That's high frequency. What we've learned is butterflies and kittens and flowers. And I remember a book, it was literally called You Don't Have the Luxury of a Negative Thought.
Spiritual bypass.
A total spiritual bypass. And that's what we've seen a lot of our colleagues fall for, is the spiritual bypass on steroids. Yeah. And that's what a narcissist, personality disorder, borderline, or psychopath counts on. They count on that. They'll keep you going with that. They'll lie to you. They have malignant intuition. They know exactly what you want to hear. So therefore, at the beginning of the lockdown, stay at home, flatten the curve, I thought, well, this seems weird, but we're all in this together. And then you'd see hearts pop out and you're like, oh yeah, all for humanity. We'll do it. And the next thing you know, we are brainwashing 3-year-olds that if they take off the mask, they're going to kill their grandmother. And a lot of them believe it. I remember I would go out walking in the woods and 3-year-olds, the parent would say, hold your breath and run around her. Daughter Kate, as you know, she just got out of here because she wasn't going to subject her children to that kind of craziness. Yeah. And here's what I noticed. I took those 2 little girls to an aquarium in Florida where they were requiring masks. And we walked in and I said to the little girls, take those off, give them to me. You're not wearing those. Because they need an authority figure. Because, socially, right? We want to fit in. We're herd creatures. We want to do what everyone else is doing. So what I do is my own little bit of resistance is I don't wear a mask in the airport. In the plane, you've got to, they'll kick you off. But in the airport. So I've gone through Detroit, Atlanta, Denver, Kansas City, take the mask off the minute I'm off the plane. No one says a word. No one. But I'm the only one. Yeah. So what I would say to people is just practice this. This is an individual strengthening. Practice this to see how uncomfortable it makes you, because it will. Because you want to just fit in so no one says anything, because we've all been trained to be obedient in public school. But just do it and then keep doing it. And when you see someone without a mask, go up to them. That's how we create this grid work of freedom.
Fun fact, humans take in more information in one day now than they did in their entire lives in the 1700s. No wonder we're overwhelmed. Our brains and bodies simply haven't evolved to manage this level of stress. And until that evolution happens, if we want to be well in mind and body, we need things that help alleviate this stress. For me, one of the key tools in my daily wellness toolkit that does this is the SENSATE. And if you've been here a while, you'll know how genuinely obsessed I am with this product. It is a piece of health tech that fits in the palm of your hand, and it basically sends infrasonic waves through the chest to activate the vagus nerve and calm the autonomic nervous system while you listen to the specially composed audio within the app. I usually use the Sensate for 10 to 20 minutes before I sleep to reduce cortisol levels, calm my brainwave states from the hectic day, and send me into a deep sleep. Clients or friends of mine who have a Sensate have told me that their sleep has never been so good. People who usually struggle with sleep just wake up in the same position they went to sleep in. Everyone needs a Sensate, in my opinion, and I particularly recommend it to anyone who suffers from overwhelm or anxiety, and anyone who wants to deepen their meditation practice. And you can get £30 off the Sensate by visiting getsensate.com and using code Lauren30. That's GETSENSATE.com, Lauren30. Thank you so much to Sensate for supporting our mission here at Reconditioned. Yeah, I've worn a mask twice this entire time.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
I've totally been against it from the beginning. And my children have never worn one, and they never will. And but it does take a lot of I don't want to say courage, but you are everyone looks at you like you are this pariah.
Yes.
And it's challenging, but I think that brings us more deeply into our own truth and makes you stand up even more for what you believe in. And I've had now situations where, and so many people in my community have had fallen out with family members, and yes, this keeps happening. These situations keep arising, but I think it pushes us further and further. And what I've seen is a few things. There are people, absolutely, totally on board with it and in the fear, very much in the fear, and you have to have compassion for that. But there is a lot of intuition there as well that's guiding people, and they don't know it yet. So even this morning, I had a situation with one of my sons, a school mum, and she said, "Oh, I'm so glad my son doesn't have to get the vaccine now." No, her daughter now has COVID, so she's like, "Well, that means she doesn't have to get the vaccine because she's a teenager." And I was holding off on getting my son to have it, but something was holding me back. And I said, "That's your intuition. Let it guide you." And I think we are softly, gently sowing seeds that are, we're sowing these seeds and people are feeling it. The difficulty is, I suppose, when you are in this part of this collective where all you see is fear, and it feels all consuming sometimes. What's your feeling on how this is going to end? Are we going to see huge shifts happening? I think it was you that I heard you say somewhere it only takes 1 to 3% of a population to make a huge change.
Yes, that's right. And we're about there.
Yeah.
Now, the astrology of October. I sometimes listen to Joni Patri, who is a Vedic astrologer out of Texas. And I only know Western astrology, but she talks about, these Rahu and Ketu, I don't know what they are, but that there's going to be this shift, and it's likely to be definitely at the end of October, November, December. Here's an example. We had, I think, 1,800 Southwest airline flights canceled on Sunday. The Southwest pilots are walking out. Mm. And this is going to catch on more and more and more. That's how a movement is. So The first person who's doing it doesn't have a lot of power, but they have an enormous amount of personal sovereignty. And I'm like that. I'm that person and have been for years. And then when it's safe, then other people will follow, but it's really the second person to do it. So now, and people don't realize, if you're an airline pilot, you got a whole group of airline pilots that you're talking to all over the world. That's your group. Mm. And so now when they do that, and it's interesting, you get to this point, and I want to talk about this point because it is a turning point in every individual. We had a woman in our group, Maine Stands Up, and when they announced the vaccine mandate for healthcare workers. One of our group, a nurse, got together a huge demonstration outside of the hospital. One of our members wanted to go, but she was afraid that her friends would see her. She didn't want to be in the news, you know, the usual, like, oh. And she put her sign in the car and had on a big hat with sunglasses so no one would see who she was. She gets there. She sees all the other people there. There's this huge group of people in solidarity, and something switched in her. And she said, suddenly, I reached that point, the line in the sand. I would have run through the windows in that hospital if I had had to. And I think for mothers, at least the potential mother bear thing in each of us, which I've talked about for decades, is if you're coming for my child, you're going to have to go through me. You hurt my child and you're a dead person. I knew, I mean, people would say, you know, could you kill someone? I said, oh, yeah, no problem. I know that part of myself. There was a thing in the 80s called model mugging, where they were teaching women to stand up for themselves. And what would happen is some guy all dressed up in like a lot of padding and all of that stuff would attack you. And it was your job to stand up for yourself. And I've listened to women who said they had to do the course 3 times to be able to stand up and fight for themselves, because the first 2 times they just cowered and, you know, stayed on the floor in fetal position. I want everyone to know the place inside where you could stand up, and if need be, you could kill another person who was about to kill your child. We need to know that place inside. I believe that this is what some of the pressure is about, so that we stand up and we say, no more. We have also had within New Age teachings, we've had 3, 4, 5 generations of law of attraction. As you think, so you feel, so you attract. And so we have, unfortunately, really screwed that up to you can never be angry and just think the thought that feels better and all of that. Well, the problem with that is that when we have what we have right now, you somehow think that being nice around a county board of supervisors or your pastor who has folded and told you that Jesus would have liked to have you have the shot. If Jesus were walking on the earth, he would have told you to have the shot. If this doesn't infuriate you, you have a problem. Up is down, down is up. Gene Decode, whose work I love, was having a colleague of his read my Wikipedia profile to him. And he said to me, boy, you have a lot of light. He said, they don't rip you apart in public like that, unless it's the opposite of the truth of who you are. So at this point, I would say to anyone, if you are trying hard to maintain your reputation within a rotten system, give it up. You don't want a good reputation in that system. Here I am with, you know, the Watkins Spiritual 100. I was surprised I made it in the 2021 version, because I figured, you know, if you questioned the narrative in 2021, then the spiritual people would think that you were no longer spiritual. But there must be someone at Watkins who's awake, which was lovely. You know, but in 2013, I was named one of the 100 most trusted people in America. How do you go from that to being one of the disinformation dozen? And by the way, because I've been in holistic medicine for so many years, that's just common. Linus Pauling, who won 2 Nobel Prizes, began to do his research on vitamin C. Then he was a crazy old demented man. Sir William Harvey, who depicted the circulation of the blood from the heart, was decried as a heretic. Emil Semmelweis, one of my favorite, who just suggested to the doctors, after you've been working with those cadavers, you might want to wash your hands before you deliver babies. At that time, the number of women who died in childbirth in the hospital was far greater than those who delivered at home. And there was great pressure to deliver in the hospital, and women were terrified of it. Whole towns rallied together in England to avoid the smallpox inoculation and got well with fresh air and care at home in quarantined villages. That's with a known bacteria, smallpox. We're talking about a virus that has never even been adequately depicted. We don't have a sample of the virus. So I just want people to know that that common sense thing needs to come roaring back. It needs to come back because all those talking heads will follow the science. I have to tell you, I've always been a little outside of my colleagues in medicine, always. But this is insane. And many of your listeners must feel the same with their families. Wait a minute. I thought my dad or my mom had common sense. I thought that my brothers, my sisters, we're now getting, friends of mine are getting wedding invitations, and it says on the bottom, if you haven't had the shot, you can't come. Oh my God. But on the other hand, if it's just one person who's scared and in the narrative and everyone else is like you and me, what you will find is that the fear of the person in the mask goes away in the group, and they begin to feel safe and secure in a whole group of people who don't buy it. And then suddenly their own sense of themselves returns.
Yeah. Because I guess your perception is based on what you're exposed to. So I'm very fortunate because I live in my own echo chamber, because my community, my tribe, are all like me. None of us vaccinate our kids. None of us, are buying into any of this. Thankfully for me, my parents are also like that. So they're not, caving to any of this. And that's amazing, because most of my friends who are like-minded, most of their parents have gone and done it. So for me, it's, and I always say this to people, it's based on what you're exposed to. So what are you exposing yourself to? Because what I'm seeing every day and what I'm reading and the people I'm listening to are exposing me to something different. So my brain is, being rewired in a very different way to if I was waking up in the morning, turning on the BBC and exposing myself to the fear and listening to, the emails that you get from the school. Another child has tested positive and you must, delete. So I do think that your perception is based on what you expose yourself to. And that's why I think it's our responsibility to shift what we're exposing ourselves to, so that we don't, because whether you believe it or not, whether you believe what's going on or not, and how deeply you believe in it, we do know that fear changes what's going on in your body. If, fear can create and manifest into illness. We know that, we know that.
Well, that's very well. Yeah, it's very well studied. We know now what we're finding out. A friend of mine in Northern California knows a lot of the ambulance drivers, the EMT guys. And she said their calls that they're getting are mostly from people having panic
attacks. Yeah. Of course, there's so much anxiety because you can't possibly live the way we're living, isolating. And when you do go out, you're wearing a mask, and there's just fear everywhere. Even it's just subliminal messages. You cannot enter the shop without a mask. Make sure you've had your vaccine. You're listening to the radio. Make sure you book in your vaccination today. Make sure you've had your booster. It's these constant subliminal messages trying to kind of infiltrate and change your perception. And we have to find a way to shut that off somehow. But something you touched on that I'd really like you to delve into a little bit more is you said about, this virus hasn't even been isolated. Right. And I, very much believe in the terrain theory versus germ theory. I'd love for you to just I watched a video with Dr. Thomas Cowan explaining this very beautifully. But it was an 1.5 hour YouTube video. How can we wrap it up to explain if this virus hasn't been isolated and there's no actual proof that this virus leads to this, why were people getting sick?
Right.
They're supposed to be the same thing.
That is because there is, in fact, a bioweapon, and it's called a spike protein. However, and by the way, that's what's in the inoculation, is 50 billion spike proteins, the murder weapon itself. And the antibodies that the body produces to that also attack the body. So people are getting sick. They got the flu. Remember, this came in the winter of 2020 and probably started in the fall of 2020, because there are people who were getting sick in October and November of 2019. But I think there's two things we could say. One, remember the geography of where people were really getting sick. So it was Wuhan, China, Northern Italy, New York City. Those, and maybe there was one other place. But the geography told you a lot, because I believe that they were spraying a bioweapon in the contrails or the chemtrails, probably the food and water in those particular areas. And those who were most vulnerable, the old, those with comorbidities, the care home people, were all getting it at the same time. Then they started in with the fear porn. So I remember there were crisis actors who were being on camera. They'd show you the ICUs. And if you look back at some of those early YouTube videos, they'd show you that they weren't even people in beds. Those were dummies. So then the fear porn began, and then everybody panicked. And then a normal flu season, and by the way, thousands die in every flu season, that started to happen. So there's two schools of thought. One, it was just the flu with a whole dose of unrelenting 24/7 panic on the news. Or there was also a bioweapon, because we know right now that if you're around people who've had the inoculation, if you're vulnerable, you can get sick. I mean, we've had women lose their babies just being around someone who's recently had the shot. We have women who are passing entire decidual casts from inside their uterus from being with a man who's had the shot. Women trying to get pregnant. Literally, the whole inside of the uterus falls out. So there's something going on that's way more than the flu. But Cowan and also Andy Kaufman have absolute proof that there's never been a viral pathogen. And Dr. Lawrence Palevsky just gave a masterful talk on this. And what he says is this: when a baby is born, a baby is born sterile. It's sterile mostly inside the amniotic sac until it passes through the birth canal. Then it's suddenly exposed to trillions of viruses and bacteria. A virus, by the way, is dead. It needs to get into the cell in order to use the cellular mechanism to reproduce. So viruses in and of themselves are harmless. And you could make a case that there's never, ever, ever been a proven viral illness. Bacterial, yes. Viral, no. So then the baby comes out and it has all these hundreds of thousands of bacteria and viruses on it. And that's when it begins to have to develop its immune system. As Dr. Palevsky said, if viruses and bacteria killed humans, no one would be alive.
Yeah.
We would be dead at birth. So this is a gigantic psyop that began really with Antoine Beauchamp and Louis Pasteur. And Pasteur said it's the germ, and Beauchamp said it's the terrain. And we are now, as humanity, going to learn a giant lesson. It is the terrain. It's always been the terrain. And we have been hoodwinked into thinking it's the germ. Now, they've used that contamination theory very successfully to control humanity for a long time. talk to any Black person who understands anything about history. You can't use this water fountain, you're unclean. You can't use this bathroom, you're unclean. Blacks only. As my friend Kevin Jenkins said, 60 years ago, he wouldn't have been able to use a public bathroom or even book a hotel room. Unclean. The Jews in Germany were accused of having typhus. They were unclean. So you see how we've used this, there's a pathogen. And I'd like everyone listening to stop something that you've probably been doing your whole life. Well, I was around so-and-so and they gave me a cold. Mm-hmm. I caught it from, where do you think you got it from? You got it because your body needed a detox. Yes. And you were vulnerable. When I would see a woman with 6 bouts of yeast vaginitis per year, I knew she didn't have a monostat deficiency. Something was wrong with the microbiome balance in the genital tract. And that's mostly what's going on with this. I haven't been scared for 1 second. I've been on planes more than normal, all the rest of it. Did I have whatever this thing is? Yeah, I did. And I did what you do, which is massive doses of vitamin D, sleep a lot on the biomat, take some saunas. It's very interesting. There's something that it does to the mitochondria where you feel so tired. Yeah. It's very, very odd. And then we have ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, which are anti-parasitic. So what is this? Is it some kind of parasite? And my colleague, Dr. Carrie Made, has looked under the microscope at what's in the shot and says, it looks like some kind of alive Hydra vulgaris. I don't know. And there's a Polish scientist who showed astounding pictures of something that looks like a hydra with tentacles growing in there. So I don't know. There's so much that is unknown. And I think the main thing is stay away from the shot. And if you're vulnerable or if you're pregnant, I'd stay away from people who've had the shot, because we do know, and it's right in Pfizer's literature, that you're not supposed to be pregnant when you've been around someone who's had the shot.
Yeah. And for those listening wanting more information on the injection itself, we had Dr. Polevsky on episode 60. So go back and listen to that, because he really goes into what the injection itself is doing and how it's working. So that's, if you're listening to this and you haven't listened to that, go back and listen to that. So yeah, obviously, like I said at the beginning, I didn't, it's always difficult to know where to go because there's so much with you and so much information. I would like to go back a little bit and just ask you how you came from this medical career and training as a medical student to being kind of this, I suppose, nonconformist within the medical world. How did that happen for you?
I was already radicalized before I went in. I just went in to find out why they were like they were. I had family members who would be dead if they hadn't signed out against medical advice, with an aunt and uncle who were both medical doctors, and a father who was a dentist. He did a lot of facial reconstruction surgery in a MASH unit during World War II. And we were into Adele Davis and spiked orange juice with vitamin C and all kinds of healthy eating. We had a compost heap and all the rest of it. So I was brought up on organic food, and my parents were doing yoga 70 years ago. Mm-hmm. So I came by it naturally. And so when I went into medical school, at the end of my residency, my cousin was seeing Michio Kushi for her fibroid uterus. And she said, why don't you meet Michio? I'm curing my fibroid with a macrobiotic diet. So I met Michio and I sat with him in consultations, and then they'd all come in with these really thick charts, and the medical profession had given up on them. And then I watched as many people healed through diet and all of that, which made total sense to me given my upbringing. I didn't question it much. My dad had Weston Price's book, Western Diet and Degeneration. That was right on his bedside table.
Wow.
So that's how it happened. Yeah.
Amazing. So essentially you were in the medical world, but with these kind of more progressive views of a holistic, integrative way of doing it.
Yeah. And then my sister was killed when I was in my second year of residency, and my mother found someone who'd worked with a spiritualist church, and she came to the house and channeled Dr. Andre. I mean, I watched her as her whole demeanor changed, and she became a different person. So she's a trance channel, telling my mother that her mother, my grandmother, was in the car with my sister when she was killed, and they went through the whole thing. So I was also introduced to that kind, to channeling and to all of that. And also angels. I spent my teenage years having breakfast with a woman named Gretchen Carroll, and she had been to Christ Word Ministry with Flower Newhouse, and Flower saw angels, and there was the angel of music and the angel of death. And so I had read that book, Angels of Eternity, when I was a teenager. That book is still available, I think, from the Christ Word Ministry. Absolutely gorgeous. So I always knew there were way other things. And then in college, I read all of Joan Grant's novels, like Winged Pharaoh. She had a lot of novels based on her past lives.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm doing a lot of past life work myself at the moment. But I work with a shaman based in Sedona, and it's powerful stuff.
Nice.
What I'd really like to touch on, because I've read most of your books, not all of them perhaps, but just the kind of the women's wisdom, women's intuition, and this kind of, divine feminine essence that we have within us. And it's such a big part of your work, and something that I've really taken away from your work as well. And I think has prompted a lot of my work with, working with women and helping them kind of step into that. I guess why it feels like we've almost moved away from, when you kind of see women listening to the doctors when they're pregnant and when they're giving birth, and how do we get that back? How do we really help ourselves step back into this inner knowing, this there's nothing more powerful than a woman's intuition, but why have we stepped so far away from it, and how can we get it back?
Well, all we have to do is look at the burning times and the 9 million women and some men who were burned as witches in the Middle Ages. That was actually a economy for many, many towns, is making the guillotines and making the witch junking chairs and all of that. So any woman who was using her intuition was punished for it. So no woman, in my experience, and that includes me, has ever trusted herself or gone with her own intuition and really owned it until she walks through the fire of the burning times. It's in the collective consciousness. And I think this Great Awakening is sort of the final walk through the fires of being burned at the stake. When Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom was first coming out, well, let's just back it up. So I was on the cover of East West Journal when my daughter Anne was an infant. And there's a picture of us from that old East West Journal that became Natural Health and all that. A picture of us standing by the Charles River in Boston. And I said to East West Journal, and that was Michio's journal with Erewhon and all that, I said, do not publish this cover story until I've passed my boards in OBGYN, my oral board. So I became board certified. And they did that. And when the issue came out, and this had to be in the early 80s, I went down to the food co-op the minute it hit the newsstands, and I bought every issue so that the doctors I worked with would never see it, because I was talking about nutrition. I wasn't talking about angels. I wasn't talking about any of this. I was talking about nutrition. And my colleagues made fun of me for talking about nutrition, but I always like to be included in the joke. So, okay. Then Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom coming out in the first edition in 1994. It's now in its 5th edition. And I'm done. It's the 5th final. And I knew I couldn't go and buy every issue. I mean, this is a Random House Bantam at the time book going everywhere. And so I was going to be outed. It's like, way back when you came out of the closet as gay. Now that's like, well, that's not a problem. But, then, oh my God, I'm going to come out of the closet as a holistic physician and my colleagues are going to know
Mm.
And I woke up for 3 days screaming. I was certain someone was in the house who was going to kill me. If you ask Kate, she will remember that when I would wake up screaming and I would go into their bedrooms and check on them. I mean, that was kind of terrifying for them. And it was that I had to walk through that wall in the morphogenic field that was there for everyone who steps through. Now, here's the good news. And this is, of course, Rupert Sheldrake's work. The minute you transform that morphogenic field in your own life, you make it way easier for everyone else to do the same. And that's why I have, I say I climbed an unmarked peak at night with no trail. And now the people who follow are coming along and putting in landscape lighting and benches so you can rest. Mm-hmm. But when I did that, no one had really done that quite the same. And each of us now, as you're doing this, you make the path wider and wider and wider. So it's no longer to say you're into angels or shamanism or you read tarot cards or whatever. No one cares about that anymore. That's no big deal. The next one is questioning the vaccine agenda. Mm-hmm. That's the latest witch burning. That's the latest one. Mm-hmm. And women who question any narrative, like questioning the narrative of 72 mandated vaccines by the age of 8. Listen, Big Pharma is going to fall. Let me be clear. Big Pharma is hanging itself. They are also taking down the medical system. The medical system is committing suicide at this point. And good. Any doctor who's going along with this, I'm sorry, any doctor who's going along with this, I just don't even know what to say. So many of them have no idea. And so they're calling me whatever they're calling me. And I've been called out now globally, which is astounding to me. It's like, wow, you guys must not have much real power. You're actually going after, a middle-aged woman living with her daughter with cats. And you think that I'm dangerous? You have no power. You have no power. When we find our true power, we become unstoppable because we're not afraid anymore. I'm not afraid. Listen, I gave my license back in 2015. I could see where it was going. And it was time to renew my license. And I thought, do I need this? No, I don't need this. I'm done with the Board of Registration in Medicine having a noose around my neck. I wasn't trying to be safe within a system. I'd already done it for 35 years. Just walking that tightrope and finally. And so what we're going to find now, and it's happening in our state, it's happening all over the world, we're creating communities where the laws of the public space do not apply to us. We're creating, now our rights, our human rights were given to us by God, not by man, not by governments. Our rights were not given to us by licensing boards. And we've all been under a spell of maritime law and the 13 bloodline families. This is well documented. We're now moving into natural law, God's law. And you have to hear it a bunch of times. But when you realize, wait a minute, we were endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. What you mean I don't need to ask permission for the Board of Registration in Medicine? Think about all the PSYOP things. Your kid can't play sports until a doctor says it's okay. What's that about? You can't start an exercise program until your doctor, who by and large knows not one damn thing about nutrition or exercise, gives you the go-ahead. What is this? A constant barrage of you are vulnerable. You need a doctor to tell you you're okay. Any mother knows that her kid is okay. Then what have we had? We've had 20, 30 years of mothers taking their kids in for all the regular shots and then having a kid have seizures, regress. I know you went through this with Dr. Pilevsky, who hasn't given a shot in 19 years as a pediatrician. Mm. But the parents are brainwashed into, well, how do I keep my kid's immunity where it needs to be? It's where it needs to be already.
Because it has an immune system.
Food. But each person has her own journey with this. And we need to give people the dignity of their own timeline. So I don't argue with anyone. I mean, if people come to me because they want to hear what I have to say. I'm not out there picketing the hospital saying, you are stupid fools the way you're delivering babies. I mean, they're now separating mothers from their babies if one of them tests positive with a test that's just garbage.
Yeah.
The test, it has no standing whatsoever. In fact, the FDA is getting rid of that test at the end of this year. They're still using it though, so you can fly internationally or any of the other stuff. It's so ridiculous. And I think as the veil is lifted, here's what I think is going to happen. I think there are going to be millions of people who have such cognitive dissonance that they may commit suicide or just be in despair. It's going to be all hands on deck. Mm-hmm. When this finally comes out, we will need to be available to rebuild our communities. Mm-hmm. And so in the meantime, right now minute, we have to have daily doses of joy and hope and fun. We need to play instruments. We need to sing. We need to stand on the ground. We need to be silly. I like to make fun of the psychopaths myself because, no vampire wants sunlight, right? Have you noticed all of the vampires? Suddenly vampires were everywhere in the media, True Blood, Twilight. What the heck? What's all that about? Well, it was predictive programming. Because it is vampires who are running this thing. And when you know who you are as a human, just like if you're a woman in a battered relationship, it is the same. Watch the Tina Turner movie where she stands up to Ike finally, because she has so much more light. And then she just looks at him, says, you don't owe me a thing. You don't owe me anything. And then you look, they're bullies, but they're weak. Let's be clear, they're bullies, but they're weak. And so when you stand up loaded with your God courage, they just go away.
I love that you described it just how you did, because I was going to ask you, a question that I get asked a lot is, it's so frustrating though, because we can see it and then all these people are, complying, and these poor babies that we're heartbroken for, and all these babies breastfeeding, from mothers who have just had the vaccine and coming out in hives and, being in the womb and the mother having this injection. And it's really difficult to keep that frustration at bay. And I think we need an element of it because we need the passion. We need that sacred rage in order to propel us to kind of be, I don't like to use the word fight because I don't want it to be a fight. I want it to be something that we're standing up against and, just kind of standing in our sovereignty. But we do need to have this element of rage within us in order to stand up to it. Oh, yeah. But how do we kind of balance that and not live within the frustration? It's very hard to hear these things all the time and then, not live within this frustration. But something you just said was really, something that my spiritual teacher teaches me. And I'd love that you said it was, we need to play, we need to be in joy, we need to have fun, we need to, put your feet on the ground, take deep breaths. And that I just love that, because really that is what we need to do to keep ourselves elevated.
The other thing you need to do, and I do this with Dr. Pilevsky all the time. All right.
I'd love to see you two together in a room. That'd be
my God. We did a thing together for Simon Park's Collecting Consciousness. And what is the new healthcare system? What would it look like? And we did I don't know where that is. It would be good to post that on my Telegram channel. But the two of us have a lot of fun. We're also into show tunes. So he'll start and then I'll sing. We were in Kansas City, walking into restaurants singing, or, walking into the elevator singing, we have a ball. I'm going to New York City next weekend. We're going to do a thing in Times Square.
Oh,
But
wow.
what's great about Larry, he's got the best gallows humor. It's so funny and it's so balancing. So what he says is this: don't chase people into burning buildings. Mm. And then he said, you know what? This whole thing could be over instantly. So here's what let's recommend. Let's recommend that people get at least 3 boosters at the same time. And then they should also get their flu shot, their shingles shot, their pneumovax, and maybe they're going to want to, get up to date on childhood vaccines if they haven't had them in a while. And they should get all of those on the same day. He said that pretty much take care of the problem. Because you never expect a compassionate pediatrician, right, to be like this, but I am. It matches my humor. And now my other daughter, Anne, is so sensitive. She goes, Mom, you just trigger me with the way you talk about this stuff. But if you've gone through surgical training and you've seen how bad it can get, then the only escape really is into that kind of Monty Python humor, because it's, you have to keep yourself alive. And in the big picture, because you're talking about past lives and all that, we never die. We don't die. We recycle. My mother just died, 95. And 1 week later, we had an amazing celebration, and we, had her ashes. We put them in a birdhouse, and then all the grandkids and all the great grandkids went up to the cemetery that my brother is president of. It abuts our family farm, dug a hole, and then just put her ashes in beside my dad. And within, I was flying to last Thursday, and they sent me a picture. A giant bald eagle landed in a tree next to the cabin where she lived. No eagle has ever been seen in this area ever. And my dad flies around the property as a red-tailed hawk. We've always known that. We see the hawk and we call it Wilbur, my dad's name. And so now, we have my mother and dad on the property as an eagle and a hawk, which reminded me of John Denver's, the Eagle and the Hawk song that he did from years and years and years ago. So when you see the magic, when you see that we don't die, when I work with mediums all the time. So my mother came to me right after her death, and she's so happy and she's so young and she's dancing with my dad and she's having a ball. And then she's still taking care of the family from afar. And she said, in my life, I was a little bit rigid about this and that and the other thing, but now I love flying around the property and seeing the cows and the horses. And so when you get into that state, Suzanne Gietzman does wonderful work with death and people who've passed over. And there was an incredible Netflix special in January of 2021 about death. And it was the best thing I'd ever seen. This woman told her daughters that she'd come back as a cardinal. You see them, it's on film. This cardinal just flies in, sits on one of them's shoulder, and it's just there while they're weeping. I mean, there is no death. And I think there are many, many people who will not be able to live in the higher vibrations of what's coming. They hold too much heaviness, and it will be okay. Then with the babies and stuff, long, long, long ago, I had to come to grips with this soul chose their parents. Yeah. As I'm doing a circumcision and the baby is screaming. I really have tried to prevent this, but I can't. And I'm so sorry that this is your path. Now, of course, I would never do one, but that back then, that's where I was.
Thank you for all your beautiful wisdom. As you know, at the end of the episode, I do a little thing called All About You. So it's just a series of quick fire questions.
Okay.
And it's just a little bit of fun. First one I ask everyone, and the other ones are just kind of more tailored to you. So the first one is, wellness is?
Wellness is a state of understanding that you are a spiritual being having a human experience. So have as much fun as you possibly can, because when you're on the other side, you don't have a body and there's no chocolate.
I love it. Of all your self-care, health optimization practices, which is the absolute non-negotiable?
Baths with Epsom salt and baking soda and music. Absolute. Yeah, absolute.
See, I knew you were my spirit animal. Because that's mine as well.
All right.
Oh, I can't live without a bath. Absolutely.
No.
And music. Oh, yeah. Absolute must for anti-aging. And I know you don't really love that term. And I know you don't talk about.
No, but I want to give it to you. And here it is. Don't ever say your age. Don't ever say your age. Step out of the cage of age. So stay with, I am an ageless, eternal being. I mean, when I wrote Goddesses Never Age, I had met Mario Martinez, and he says that we co-author each other's biology, which we do, which is why when you're around masked people, it feels so bad. And why they're around you, they take the mask off. But if you start with at my age, or I'm getting older, or any of that age talk, just step out of the age talk. In fact, when anyone presents me with that age talk, I'm like, you don't get it. You don't get it. I don't give my age. I don't think about my age. I celebrate my birthday. I never give it an age. I stay away from milestone birthdays. Those are millstones around your neck. I just assume none of it applies to me. That's how I do it.
And just so you know, my husband is currently reading Goddesses Never Age.
Oh, I've gotten good, from men. They say they get a lot out of that book.
I think all men need to read it.
Yeah, I think so too, because they get into that age thing. I've told Kevin Jenkins goes, well, I'm getting older. I go, Kevin, I never want to hear you talk about your age. You are a gorgeous man. You could be anywhere between 30 and 50. So just, don't talk about, because your body hears every word. We know that. So I just assume the best is yet to come. And this age thing doesn't apply to me. So that's it.
Amazing. Something you swear by that most others would think is nuts.
I swear by this belief that I've only just begun and the best years of my life are all ahead.
Oh, I love that. A question you ask yourself the most?
I don't do that. A question I ask myself the most. What's on the schedule for today?
Very pragmatic.
Right.
Okay. And the last one. So I don't know if you're going to like this, but I do think it's quite pertinent. The best lesson you've learned that can only come with age.
Oh, yeah. I agree with that. Absolutely. And that is, this too shall pass.
Yeah.
And it's not as big a deal as you think it is. And I say that having gone through the death of my father, the death of my sister, and the death of my beloved in 2020. So these are the things that are meant to bring more and more light into your body. And nothing is forever. And this is what's going to make you who you are. Beautiful.
So there's obviously so much we didn't touch on: menopause, perimenopause, all these things. But for anyone listening, just make sure to check out Dr. Northrup's books, all her bestsellers: Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom, Goddesses Never Age, like we've said. And honestly, for preparing for menopause or perimenopause, in advance, I always think, even if you're not, because what happens is women start experiencing the symptoms, and then what are the books I can buy? Give me the information. And I think the best thing is prepare yourself in advance, know the science and know how to help your body. And
absolutely. Yeah. The wisdom of menopause is just loaded with that. Even if you did, let's say you're 35, even if you did the first 5 chapters, because it will give you a preview of coming attractions. Yeah. And if you realize that is a soul journey, grow or die, which is where we are right now. I mean, I've talked about the birth, that this is where we're in a transition ready to push. We are in perimenopause, grow or die. The whole planet is in perimenopause. Yeah.
It's a really good way of describing it.
Right, right.
And also your newsletter at drnorthrup.com.
Oh, yes.
Highly recommend
Oh, yes.
people signing up
And
to that.
I'll be starting a community, an online community, and I'll go back to my daily videos. I think I can put them on Telegram now because it's
Absolutely.
really right now. It's especially important as we go through the final throes of this rebirth. I would say the next 2 to 3 months are going to be shocking for not us. And I want people to know the book of Revelations, that's for the demons. That's not for us. So we want people to know that. Don't be afraid.
Thank you so much. Please keep me updated with all these things in this community. And obviously I'm following your Telegram account, but we will link everything in the show notes so everyone else can have access to it too. And thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Reconditioned. I am honestly so grateful to each and every person that tunes in. Thank you also for taking responsibility for your own well-being. You should know that just by choosing to listen to podcasts like this that further your well-being, you're moving more deeply into abundance consciousness. Now don't forget, I have a bunch of free resources over at laurenvakneen.co.uk, as well as every recommendation you could ever need in regards to your well-being on the LV Recommends page, all categorized for your ease. Thank you also to our sponsors. These episodes would not be possible without them, so make sure to check them out and get some pretty awesome discounts on the show notes. And of course, make sure you're subscribed to the podcast so that you can get updated each time a new one is released. Thank you. I appreciate you.